Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this first of our cybersecurity symposiums. My name is Jarret Benedict. I'm the director of our managed services sales with Night Office Solutions. Today, we've got a few panelists that are going to be speaking, which I'll introduce here in a minute. I'm going to give a general background on a few things related to cybersecurity, some fun stats, and then we're going to get into the actual panelists who will be talking about some pretty specific products that are on the high end of cybersecurity, endpoint protection, network monitoring, event tracker protection as well. And then you're going to hear from also Scott Fillmon, who's our VP of Technology and our VCIO with Night Office Solutions. Thank you very much again for joining us. I'm going to jump in here, so give me just a minute. Okay, first off, in terms of the speakers, we're going to be hearing from Rick Ericson, who's with SentinelOne. SentinelOne is really one of the industry leaders when it comes to total endpoint protection. He's going to talk about their solution and how it involves really kind of next level security protection for your end users and staff. It involves a 24/7 security operations center component to it. And so he's going to talk about how that works and how they mitigate problems and really offer the best overall protection that you can have for your end user staff. We're then going to be talking about Netsurion as well. Netsurion is a product that is at the firewall level that helps track things that you have. President Ananth actually have had a last minute change here, is going to be speaking on that. And then Scott Fillmon is going to be leading in between this. We're going to ask that you can submit any questions via the chat function. Scott Fillmon will be leading Q&A to talk about the different products and questions that you might have. And then at the end, we're going to do something fun and give away a few door prizes. We thank everybody that's joined us today. You're going to be receiving a $25 Grubhub gift card for just for joining us. And then we're going to be giving away some pretty good door prizes. So stay tuned till the end. Thank you very much. So one of the things that the first questions when you really think about cybersecurity, things that come to mind, you think about, and these are terms that you hear about all the time in the news, right? There's been a ransomware attack, some major company. Just in this past week, I think I just heard that Uber, Uber was just attacked like just this week. There's been some big cases recently. Phishing and social engineering. This is one of the big problems, right? You get a lot coming at your staff via email, so we're going to be addressing that as well. And then obviously getting your own your email compromised. Or it's one of your vendors that gets their email compromised. And of course, the bad guys have gotten pretty crafty. They're always trying to go after data identity theft, getting information that they can use, or getting at your private data. Worst case scenarios, those ransom viruses want to come in and lock up all your data and then make you pay a hefty fee to get it back. And our philosophy is that security involves always having a lot of layers in place to protect yourself, so you're not an easy target, and then also having some layers in place for backup and disaster recovery as well. And malicious insiders as well, guarding against what might happen internally on your own network as well. Some of the common cybersecurity threats that you see out there, malware, viruses, ransomware, phishing attacks, email spoofing. These are all the ways that they're coming at you via either folks are out either being attacked sometimes when they're not even on their systems. That's one of the things that SentinelOne helps guard against. Or a lot of things come in via email, in a user's email. Looks like a legitimate email. One of the layers that we add in as well is cybersecurity awareness training for your staff, because let's face it, at the end of the day, the staff is kind of always the weakest link when it comes to cybersecurity and threats. Even with the best controls in place, you still rely a lot on your end users to think a little bit before they click, so that they're not clicking on something that could potentially launch something harmful. One of the big complexities today is how do you deal with, a lot of folks, especially through COVID and beyond, have gone to where they have a lot more of their staff working remote. And in some cases, even having their own devices, so having a good bring your own device policy in place as well, so that anybody that's coming in and touching your network has some of the basic controls and protections in place. A few interesting stats here. Minimize that. A new ransomware attack occurs every 14 seconds in the US. And when you think about that, just in the time that we're on this, think about how many attacks and threats are going to be hitting. There are at least each day 350,000 new instances of different malware. Again, the bad folks are always constantly at work coming up with new variations that aren't always easily detected by the traditional antivirus. And when you take into consideration both malware programs and unwanted apps down the line, malware infections can be installed long enough. 21% of all businesses files are not protected in any way. That's definitely a problem, right? Making sure that your files are backed up so if something does happen, you can recover. And stats show that 41% of companies have over 1,000 sensitive files, including credit card numbers and health records, left unprotected. A very big deal. So one of the things that we continue to always talk about with our clients, and that you guys, when you're talking with consultants, is to make sure that besides all the security layers that you have in place, make sure you've got a good backup and disaster recovery strategy as well. Some recent stats as well show that the average cyber attack can cost businesses upwards of 200,000 to even more, depending on the size of businesses. And it's not just big enterprise businesses that are under attack; it's smaller businesses as well. When you think about all that you're doing through, credit card transactions, if you're taking credit cards and being PCI compliant, and then there can be some pretty hefty fines. Certain industries, especially when you think about folks in medical and HIPAA, and there's been cases as well where banks can terminate relationship because of breaches, as well as insurance companies not honoring if you've got a cybersecurity insurance policy on there as well. So at the end of the day, you want to have good protections in place, and you want to make sure that you're able to have a good backup and disaster recovery plan in case something does slip by. Okay, I'm going to open it up now and actually jump in. Yeah, we're going to hand it off to Rick, who's going to talk about SentinelOne.
So we're going to go ahead and discuss what SentinelOne is, and what's the true difference between SentinelOne and this EDR that everybody's hearing about, and the MDR. EDR is that endpoint disaster and recovery. MDR is that M is just really about manage. And now I'm going to go ahead and show you what SentinelOne is and what it does, and what's the difference between, again, traditional antivirus out there, and then what is SentinelOne and what the EDR really stands for. So the first slide we're going to go to is what is EDR. EDR is endpoint detection and response. And like I said, that M on that MDR is just for manage. So that means someone behind the SentinelOne product is actually watching it. That is our 24/7 SOC. They're going to go ahead and analyze on top of SentinelOne, analyzing the actual events that are happening and being triggering on either your servers or your desktops. We have a SOC that is also going ahead and basically looking over and making sure that there's any true positives that are escalated to you, they are real, and there is a problem going on. So again, what is EDR? Endpoint detection and response works by monitoring actively and storing that information. So unlike traditional antivirus, where someone technically has to get hit with a ransomware or a Trojan or some type of virus out there nowadays for everybody else to then be protected. What EDR is, it's basically babysitting your computer. So unlike traditional antivirus, where it needs to constantly scan, SentinelOne is actually watching the activity of the file that you're about to launch. So again, that's where that behavioral based monitoring of threats happen, that real-time response and remediation. Again, once an outbreak were to happen, SentinelOne goes ahead and kills it and quarantines it. And then after it's killed and quarantined, if there are additional steps that are needed, that's when the SOC will go ahead and look into those issues. And then, of course, integration with other security products. So this next slide is, again, kind of going to showing you what the traditional antivirus is based on versus the EDR. Again, traditional antivirus can only detect previous known threats. Like I said, someone has to get hit by a virus or a ransomware for those definitions, for those traditional AVs to understand what it is that got hit. Then they update those definitions, which then they update their virus definitions within their application, and then everybody else is then protected. Again, there's very little to no information collected on those. Usually if there's a ransomware or a bad file that is downloaded, traditional AV matches it with a hash. That's a bad file, and it goes ahead and deletes that or quarantines it, depending on how you have that traditional AV set up. And then, of course, there's very little to no, minimum to no added features or benefits to the actual application. where EDR can detect previously known and unknown threats. So of course, EDR, Sentinel-1 here, it's going to go ahead and if a file is out there and it's a bad known file, of course, just like traditional AV, Sentinel-1 is going to go ahead and pick that up and remove it. But unlike traditional AV, Sentinel-1 is going to go ahead and monitor that file. So if you go ahead and actually launch a file that acts a little suspicious, again, you can download a PDF, an image file, you can download an Excel spreadsheet that has some baked in macros. And actually, I have a video that I'll be going ahead and showing you guys on what that is and the steps of how an outbreak were to happen. And the feature that Sentinel-1 actually has a patent on, which is their rollback feature. That rollback feature is going to go ahead and within a blink of an eye, go ahead and basically revert that PC back to where it needs to be. So as a ransomware outbreak were to happen, I'm going to go ahead and show you what our SOC will be doing and what Sentinel-1 is actually doing as well. So we'll go on to the next slide here. So the Sentinel-1 platform. So there are two versions that we offer here. The Sentinel-1 control, which comes with the specific features that you see below that are currently highlighted. You get that static AI, that behavioral AI. You get that device control, firewall control, vulnerability management, and of course, the movement prevention as well. We'll go up one more. And here we can see, again, still with that control features, you have that remediation and rollback, network quarantine, full remote shell, and of course the EDR control as well. And that full remote shell comes in handy where, let's say an outbreak or something were to happen on one of your systems, Sentinel-1 is actually able to go ahead and disconnect that machine, whether it be a server or a desktop. We're able to disconnect that machine. We're able to then create an end-to-end tunnel where Sentinel-1 in the console, in the SOC, are able to only communicate with that machine. That being said, if there's some commands that we're able to push out on our end, we're able to push those out and then be able to resolve a situation before turning that machine back online. Go ahead to the next slide. So this is our SOC layer. So our SOC layer, of course, is going to come on between, of course, you got Sentinel-1 control baseline doing everything that it needs to do in protecting your systems. But then you have that SOC layer that is managed by 180 plus SOC analysts. I believe we're going for 200 at the end of the year. So again, Sentinel-1 is going ahead and looking at all those events. And then, of course, more than 3 million alerts triggered per month. That's a lot of alerts. And as time goes on, that's going to be more and more. So our SOC is going ahead and, again, visually looking at every single event that's coming through that Sentinel-1 deems to be a positive. We go ahead and investigate that. And if that is a true positive, we go ahead and escalate it. If it's a false positive, we take care of it. So again, kind of minimizing the amount of noise that you get out there as well. And then we also offer the complete version. This complete version kind of gives you a nice attack storyline, gives you deep visibility and threat hunting. So the Sentinel-1 Complete has a threat hunting capability. So if, let's say, if someone were to download a bad file on or let's say if a phishing attack happened and you wanted to know if more than one person downloaded a specific file during that phishing attack, you're able to go ahead and utilize that threat hunting capabilities to be able to scan every computer that has the Sentinel-1 agent out there to be able to see if that file is out there somewhere else. So that's really the true difference between control and that complete version. So this is how the Connectwise EDR works. So again, you got your workstations and servers with the agent deployed. All the logs and information are then sent up to the Connectwise cloud, which is then analyzed by both the Connectwise SOC and Sentinel-1. And then from there, the remediation would happen. So again, like I said, if something were to happen or if an outbreak were to happen, Sentinel-1 by default is going to go ahead and kill and quarantine. And then 99% of the time, remediation fixes those issues that are lingering. So we'll go ahead and delete any changes. Let's say if a ransomware were to happen, that it drops a lot of different files all over the place. And on top of that, tries to create situations, or in this case, files, registry edits, tasks. So the remediation portion will go ahead and remove all that. And then again, like I said, we have that rollback feature. That rollback feature it's based off the VSS shadow copies that Windows has. So it is a Windows specific feature. But once you have those shadow copies deployed, SentinelOne goes ahead, takes a copy of those, stores those into a nice secure location. And then if an outbreak were to happen, or if you had a bad entity on your network, one of the things that they normally go after is to remove the shadow copies, because that's where your restore points are. That's how you would basically restore your system. So viruses, ransomwares, or the hackers themselves are known to attack those key features or those key environments. So again, that's why SentinelOne kind of carries that over and encrypts it in a special location that they have. All right. And then I'm going to go ahead. We're going to jump over into the video. And like I said, so this video is going to go ahead and show you on someone went ahead, downloaded a bad Excel file. They go ahead and launch the macros that are in there. There, in some cases, macros are 100% normal within an Excel spreadsheet, but it depends on what that macro is doing. So again, like I said, traditional AV, that file were to download, and then that user is going to go ahead and launch those macros. Traditional AV isn't going to be able to see that or even detect that until really a lot of the bad stuff is already happening, right? Because if there's a file that is detected, the Sentinel, the traditional AV is going to pick up specific files that are known to be bad, but not everything will be picked up. Where in this case, SentinelOne is going to go ahead and monitor and look exactly on how the outbreak were to happen. So I'm going to go ahead and play this video.
Opened. And we're going to open this spreadsheet, just like you would any other downloaded file. And I go to hit update currency, and, nothing happens. It's not doing what it's supposed to. But it looks like macros are blocked. What is a user always going to do? We're going to go ahead and click allow update. And looks like it goes out and it grabs that current exchange rate. So I'm getting the current exchange rate. Everything looks pretty normal. Unfortunately, in the real world, some of these bad macros and these macro-based attacks aren't labeled start attack. But before we go ahead and click start attack, we're going to do a little bit of pre-work on the machine. So let's take a look at our scheduled tasks. And we're going to refresh this real quick. And you can see, just our normal scheduled tasks here. We've got Google, Edge, OneDrive, and our SentinelOne updater, because our machine is protected with SentinelOne. So let me open up a command prompt here, and we're just going to make sure, everything's normal. We can connect to the internet. All right, looks like we can connect to the internet. Everything's normal on this machine. So let's go ahead and get back into our scenario. We're going to pretend that this macro isn't labeled start attack. It's built into the update currency. But let's go ahead and click that. And we hit start attack, and it's going to start simulating a normal macro-based attack. So we can see some bad things are happening here. SentinelOne has already detected this threat. And this is where typically this threat is actually going to be blocked by SentinelOne. I have this machine set on an alert-only mode. So we can kind of simulate what would happen if something were to get by that security, and how can we fix this machine? So let's go ahead and hop into our SentinelOne console, and I'll walk you through what the SOC is actually going to do to respond to this threat. All right, so we're in the SentinelOne console, and it doesn't matter when this alert comes in. If it comes in at 10 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock at night, our SOC is going to have that eyes on glass to really be able to respond to these alerts, anytime they come in. So when we see this come in, we're going to go ahead and click on it to get a little bit more information. Right off the bat, we've got a lot of information here about what command line was launched, some information about our endpoint itself, and then we've got these threat indicators. And these threat indicators line up with the MITRE ATT&CK framework. What this is, if you haven't heard of it, is it actually kind of tracks, what attackers are doing and kind of classifies these into different areas. So we're seeing, some persistence mechanisms, some information stealing, Chrome sensitive information was accessed, some exploitation things, that initial document behaving abnormally. It's not looking good. So if we need a little bit more information, we can kind of hop over to this Explore tab. And this is where we can kind of follow the attack as it's taking place. So we see that initial open office, our euros to US dollars file was opened. When that macro was launched, it launched a batch file. And that batch file launched command.exe, some PowerShell, some scheduled tasks, some registry edits, a lot of things that aren't looking good on that endpoint. So if we scroll down a little bit further kind of break down all the actions that have taken place. Any file actions, any network actions, processes, registries, or those different threat indicators. So if I look at the network actions, I see PowerShell a couple times here, and it's reaching out to a couple external IPs. And I know from my research, or our crew's research, the cyber research unit, that these external IPs are known for serving up ransomware. So the first thing we're going to go ahead and do is disconnect this machine. We don't want this to progress any further. You definitely don't want it spreading to anything else on the network. So we're going to go ahead and isolate that machine while we investigate it and see what else we need to do to clean it up and remediate this attack. So as we hop back to our desktop, we're seeing a lot of things that don't look very good. Right here we are getting a lot of red, which means the script has stopped. Hopefully this means that our machine was isolated successfully. But we've got, the normal ransomware background, and some of our files are probably encrypted. But let's take a look here, at our scheduled tasks. We'll refresh this, and we're seeing this malware has really started to embed itself into our endpoint. We've got our really evil task and our evil task. So we want to make sure that when we clean this up, we get rid of all of this. Before we do that, we're going to go ahead and verify, that our machine is actually isolated. We can no longer communicate with the internet. We are getting that general failure. That's a good sign. We'll go ahead and ping by IP address as well, just to kind of show you. It doesn't matter, if it's a IP address or a URL. This machine is essentially isolated. The only thing it can communicate with is that Sentinel-1 console. So let's go ahead and put our SOC analyst hat back on, hop back into the Sentinel-1 console, and get this machine cleaned up. All right, so we're back in the Sentinel-1 console. We can see a lot of bad things have happened on this machine. We definitely want to take action, make sure that we can get it cleaned up and get this user up and going as quickly as possible. When it comes to those mitigation actions, we've actually got a few things that we can do. Our kind of low-level response is initially just kill. We're going to kill all of these processes related to this threat. Next level up is quarantine, and as you can see, it kind of builds upon that. So first thing we're going to do is kill all those processes, and then we're going to quarantine all the files that this dropped. So the initial euros to US dollars, this dtk.bat, any of the other batch files, temporary files that this malware dropped, we're going to remove them from the endpoint. Remediate is one of our more common methods that we do. It kind of undoes a lot of those file and system changes created by the threat, but I think we need to take this one step further. And what we can do on our Windows machines actually is we can roll back. So we're actually going to restore any file and configuration changes that threat had done to the endpoint. And we do this by rolling back to a protected shadow copy on those Windows machines. So we're going to go ahead and mark it as resolved. This is a true positive. Typically, what our SOC is going to do is they're going to add it to our global blacklist as well. So, where this time maybe it got by that initial layer of protection before it was stopped, now it's going to be blocked for all of our partners on that initial execution. Mark it as a true positive and hit apply. So the response typically takes, maybe a minute or two. It really depends on what was actually done to the endpoint. What do we need to undo? That was actually pretty quick there. But we can see here that it actually killed 102 processes, quarantined 11 files, remediated 86 different changes on the endpoint, and we rolled back 240 pieces on the actual endpoint itself. So I can export all this stuff. I can export this map if I need to do any reporting on it, if I need to get a little bit more information, but all this was successful. So it looks like the machine is cleaned up. So let's go ahead and reconnect it. And we'll go ahead and send that reconnect signal to our endpoint. And let's go ahead and hop back into the endpoint, make sure that it is actually cleaned up. All right, guys, so we're back on our endpoint here. And let's go ahead and kind of verify that everything was cleaned up like it should have been. So I'll refresh our scheduled tasks here, and we can see that evil task and that really evil task have been removed. So that's a good sign. If we look at our folder here, where our initial spreadsheet was, that euros to US dollar, it's actually been removed. Our background's back to the normal background here, no more ransomware. Let's go ahead and make sure we're back online. And we are back online. So our machine is essentially cleaned up. Hopefully this user learns a little bit, not to click all those bad macros and download all these crazy files.
All right. And Q&A if anybody has any questions. So what just happened there, I'll kind of go over real quick. Again, a file was downloaded. A file then was executed. A ransomware outbreak was happening, of course. But then again, Sentinel-1 went ahead, killed and quarantined anything that was going on. And then on top of that, our SOC has gone ahead and remediated the whole situation without, again, rebooting that PC. So with that being said, again, if there's any questions, please go ahead and ask.
Hey, thanks very much on that, Rick. That's some great stuff. Yeah, let's open the floor up for some conversation and see if we've got some questions out there. So one of our co-hosts is going to open up everyone's mic really quick. And so let's just see what we got. Who's got a question for Rick and Sentinel-1?
I can read off of a couple that
You
have
got some
come
in the chat?
through. Yeah, it looks like Blaine was asking, is this a product that you would buy? Okay, so Blaine, this is, and we can cover separately kind of pricing component of it. It is not something that you would do on your own. It's a completely managed solution, talking about the Sentinel-1. So it's fully managed endpoint protection and is an upgrade, Blaine, in this case, to your current endpoint protection as well. Alan asked, is Sentinel-1 console monitored 24/7? Is there any way to program the console to automate the process of terminating a threat and perform a rollback on unaffected endpoints?
So
Alan,
Rick, first question, go ahead.
Yeah. So yes, it is 100% looked at 24/7. So that console, any alerts that are coming in, any incidents that are happening, is being monitored 24/7 on, with our SOC that's behind it. And your second question, yes, Sentinel-1 is already going ahead and it's going to kill and quarantine. It's going to remediate any issues that, well, in this case, it's going to go ahead and take care of the issues that are going on. So let's say if an outbreak were to happen at 3 o'clock in the morning, of course, everybody might be sleeping at that time. The Sentinel-1 application is going ahead and it's going to protect that system. Then, of course, the investigation side of things, if anything were to need, to move forward from there, then our SOC will go ahead and reach out to the correct team to be able to then resolve that situation. But the rollback feature is not performed automatically, and that is due to the fact of when it comes to restoring anything, whether it be a server or a desktop, in some cases, a restore of anything could cause some issues. So that specific feature is only, it's kind of like the last resort type thing. Hopefully the remediation, like I said, 99% of the time, that remediate button does resolve everything, but there is a chance that, a newer ransomware outbreak were to happen and that rollback feature is then needed. But our SOC is always going ahead and they're going to reach out to the team to validate before they initiate that. And it looks like I do see the questions here.
Hey,
here.
Rick,
Yep.
Hey, real quick though, I want to follow on to that question. This
Sure.
is Scott. How does the end user, how is the end user engaged when a threat is detected, and how does the SOC work with them to do the remediation and rollbacks?
Sure. All right, Scott. So in this case, the end user, in this case, they're going to be all of the remediation and all the SOC reaching out. They're going to be reaching out to you, your team, Scott, to facilitate anything that's happening. So your team would be, of course, alerted pretty instantaneously with that alert. And then again, depending on the situation, right? We're not here to alert you or call out to you on everything, all the false positives. Let's say if someone just downloaded a toolbar and went to deploy that, of course, that will be picked up as bad. But we're not going to go ahead and call you right then and there. If an outbreak were to happen, we'd be reaching out to you via phone. And then, of course, initiating the correct steps with you and your team to be able to remediate the situation that's happening with the end user.
Rick, so it's basically, I just wanted to make sure it's clarification. That's kind of a collaborative, it's a collaborative effort between the Night Office Solutions service team and the SOC to work with the end user to remediate this threat.
That is correct, Scott.
Perfect. Thank you for that. We have a couple other questions. You want to go ahead and pick those up, Kevin?
Sure.
Rick, sorry.
Yeah, no. So how is the shadow copy protected? So Sentinel-1 actually has a patent on that. they are tossed in their own patented type of encryption that they have. So every time so you do have to have shadow copy enabled on the Windows device, depending on how you have your shadow copy set up. Of course, some people have them every few hours, some people have them every 24 hours. So every time a new shadow copy is detected, SentinelOne is going ahead and it's going to take that copy of that shadow copy that Windows has generated and encrypt it.
I see
All
an
right.
anonymous one asking about does Sentinel eliminate completely the need for an AV?
Yes, it does.
It
You
is.
can you could definitely utilize SentinelOne as the one all true all, but of course there are we do see some people run two type of solutions, an EDR and maybe an AV, a traditional AV type solution. You don't really want to have, it's just like back in the day, you don't want to have more than one type of solution like that, because at some point they will conflict. Even if you have whitelisting between two applications, sometimes they still just don't want to play right, because you got to understand that they're both doing the same exact thing. And especially nowadays, again, traditional AV, I would say it completely wipes it. If you have two EDRs, again, those two are going to butt heads. SentinelOne, once it's first deployed, unlike traditional AV, SentinelOne does a one scan of the whole system, and then after that, the scan is completely done. So again, then after that, it's babysitting you, where traditional AV is going to have to scan every single day to make sure that you're protected. All right, and I got another one by Alan. Like other antivirus malware software, is SentinelOne installed on every endpoint, or is it installed on servers, networks? Is it lightweight, or how does it affect the PC performance? So yes, so Alan, in this case, yeah, SentinelOne would be deployed on every system, whether it be Mac, Linux, or Windows, your servers and workstations. It's not going to do anything on the network level. That would be more of a SIM solution that you would need on that. But it is, of course, tracking and making sure if anything lateral movement network-wise, it's going to go ahead and detect and take care of that. It is a very lightweight agent, just like how I was just responding to the other question above. It does a one scan, and after that, SentinelOne is kind of just idle in the background, babysitting those specific files that you're running. So in this case, unlike traditional AV, where it has to scan every day, SentinelOne does a one scan. After it's performed that one scan, depending on the server or the workstation speed, of course, it could take up to 24 to 48 hours for that initial scan to take place. But once that scan is done, it is done. And like I said, it's a very lightweight agent that just kind of sits in the background and babysits those files. All right, and then there are some malwares that embed themselves and do not for weeks and months to ensure that the propaganda of the backup files. Will this identify the sorts of malware? Yes. So Charles, in that case, of course, if that specific file is dormant and depending on the activity that it's performing, which I totally get your question in that case. In some cases, files are sitting there, or an attacker is within your system for so long. Of course, if that file is doing anything malicious, in this case, SentinelOne is monitoring every file, of course, that is actively on there. If it's pinging out to a specific IP address, or if it's allowing specific people to come in, of course, SentinelOne will detect that and mitigate that situation. But in this case, if it's a file, nothing's happening, and then months later it goes to launch, depending, of course, on how that launches and what that activity is, yes, SentinelOne will go ahead and pick that up. All right, next question. Will this shut down the user's computer completely so they will not be able to do anything? So in this case, SentinelOne's not going to shut down the PC. So our SOC will go ahead and initiate a disconnect of that specific machine. So let's say if an outbreak were to happen during the middle of the night, our SOC goes ahead and disconnects that machine. Your users get in the next morning, go sit down. They'll be able to log in. They'll be able to do what they need to do because of the cache credentials that are most likely embedded in that system. But internet-wise, they will not be able to do anything. They'll be able to, they won't be able to do anything internet-wise because that will be fully disconnected, and it won't be connected back until we initiate that reconnect. Once that reconnect happens, and of course, we won't initiate that reconnect until we're sure that that system is cleared up, because we want to go ahead and segregate that system out of the network to make sure it doesn't go to any other computers. Can SentinelOne's console be integrated with Office 365 admin console in any way? As of right now, I don't think there is. But if you're looking for Alan, it really depends on what you're looking for at that aspect, because of course Sentinel-1 is more, agent based, so it has to be deployed on a specific system. But if you're looking to get the logs of an Office 365 admin center itself, again, that would be more of a SIM solution to give you those login informations. Hopefully that answered your question, Alan. And then it looks like the last one. Is there insurance that comes with this if something gets through and we spend? So yes, Sentinel-1 does offer a ransomware guarantee that I believe it's up to $1 million, and I believe it's $1,000 per endpoint. But of course, just like anything else out there are stipulations with that. There are specific things that need to be, made sure that are done. Agents need to be up to date. It has to be deployed fully on every machine, whether that's a hybrid model or an internal type model. It would have to be deployed on every single machine. But yes, they do offer a warranty. You can actually Google that, and you should be able to pick that up and kind of read through those terms and conditions. But they do offer a ransomware guarantee. All right, our electrical medical records is completely online and would create a huge problem. How fast is the turnaround time from when an employee internet shuts down to when you are notified? So that all depends on your stipulations. So when you first sign up with us with our SOC, you can actually define that specific SLO in this case. So if you wanted someone to reach out to you sooner than later, of course, I believe there's an hour SLO on that, but I believe you can get that shorter. But of course, that is an extra fee with that. But there is capabilities of doing that. And usually, if we disconnect that machine, our SOC is already currently actively looking at that situation, so they're going to be reaching out to the night office team to get them involved as soon as possible. Because again, we don't want to, of course, take the network down or take anything down without reaching out to you. So if anything were to happen and suspicious, we're going to go ahead and of course disconnect that machine off. But we're going to reach out to you right then and there because we would like to alert you that, hey, there's a problem going on and we've disconnected your machine.
Okay, I think let's go ahead and turn the floor back over there to you. I want to introduce, this is Mr. Ananth. He is the president of Netsurion, and he's one of the co-creators. So he's really going to be able to talk at a high level. Keep in mind, of course, we do have some end users, so we might need to bring it down a little bit on some areas. But this is a product that we've been advising clients as well, that even many times when they have a cybersecurity insurance policy, that they require having some type of event tracker to be able to log the tracks when they've had an attack, to be able to be compliant with when they go to if they are going to file a claim with insurance. So that's another aspect of why we really like the Netsurion product as well. Mr. Ananth, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. A little bit of background. So the thought is to spend the next 20 minutes, maybe the next 10 minutes, talking about what the threat landscape looks like and why solutions like this have become important. And then another 8 or 10 minutes on the solution itself. A little bit about us, where we come from and why are we qualified to address you. We run a 24/7 SOC, have done so for a number of years. We're currently ingesting about 16, it's actually closer to now 18 billion events or signals per day from customers around the globe. And we have more than 120 people in our SOC whose main mission, of course, is to perform threat detection. The platform itself is hosted and it's an XDR solution. So in terms of the threat landscape, we sponsored a survey earlier this year from CyberEdge out in Annapolis, Maryland, and they talked to about 1,400 practitioners, and they came up with a few results that we thought were instructive. This is 2022. In the next slide, we're going to talk about what we see forward in 2023, but you're probably familiar with this if you're operating a network or if you're down in the trenches. One, of course, is that the ransomware problem has become really a serious thing. Crime does pay is the message that the bad guys have taken away. And so they're out and about, particularly in the Western world, which is always on broadband connections and has, the maximum riches, if you like. because that's really where the bad guys go. So that was one obvious result of the survey. But the second one, which has also been around for a while, is that in order to combat this, the security skills are in short supply. It's true not just for you as a practitioner, but it's also true for us as a vendor. People that really know their way around this are like hen's teeth. You really can't find them often enough. What is stressing practitioners, operators? Well, first and foremost, it is malware and ransomware, but also account takeover. You must have seen these stories of business email compromise and the ability not to have MFA. And so they've taken over the account and they're not who they say they are or how they're logging in as. And of course, phishing's been around for a while. So these were the results of the survey. So what's preventing people from being able to defend effectively? One is the aforementioned security skills problem, but also the employees sometimes need better education as to what's a threat and what not to do. One of the favorite tactics that we used to see in audits is Jarret comes in the morning and spreads out a bunch of USB drives in the break room, and after lunch checks to see if any of those were picked up and stuck inside PCs, because who can resist, a found free money. Another problem is poor integration between tools. You wind up having to have a swivel head and looking from one console to another. Each of them is possibly best of breed, but then 2, 3, 4 best of breed type solutions, and pretty soon you have neck ache. Last but not the least, still in some industries, support from management can be a challenge. You want money for what? Because this is a cost center. This is not a profit center. And so something that you do to shore up the house has to take second priority over possibly revenue generating activity. Also, of course, work from home has become a thing. And so endpoint security software, like you just heard, has become important. Remote employees are connecting through VPN, so securing that. And then network access control. So these are the results of the survey. Looking back to 2022, but if you look forward to 2023, and that's, by the way, part of my role, I'm the Chief Strategic Officer here at Netsurion. So my role is to look forward, look in the market, and think about what V.Next is going to have. Well, here are the trends that we see coming in 2023 that you have to be ready for. First of all, coronavirus changed everything. Lots of work from home. And then data centers shifting from on-premise to the cloud. That was there from the beginning, but coronavirus has frankly accelerated it. So this means your network diagram has changed. So has your protection changed accordingly? For instance, take vulnerability scan. If the endpoint was assumed to be at the office and could be reached by a scanner and it's now sitting at home and is almost never coming in, how do you scan? How do you patch? So this would be something for you to actually think about. Number 2 on my list, ransomware has been very successful. There's obviously lots of defense now against it, especially against the desktop. But operational tech is still not very well secured. I'm talking about things like cameras and HVAC systems, which all too often are also connected to the IT network. And so therefore, ransomware attacks, we believe, will shift to focus on weaker endpoints, which are OT rather than IT. Also, some specific verticals that have tended to underinvest in security have a big investment in OT and have seen good times in spite of the pandemic. One example is manufacturing. Another example is healthcare. These two verticals use OT quite significantly and see security as a second-class problem. Of course, the first-class problem being either manufacturing or healthcare. And so we think that they will be subject to these kinds of attacks in 2023. Skill shortage is an old story. One way to get around this is to maybe co-source so that you're not just buying technology, you're in fact getting a service associated with it. And this can help you if you're a customer. For vendors, we have to think about automation. We have to think about training. Number 4 on my list, what do we learn in 2022? That bad guys are very patient, that they do a lot of homework, that they operate from the terrain, whereas defenders typically operate from the map. Bad guys don't know what you have connected, so they will go off and try to find it. On the other hand, good guys all too often are depending upon a network diagram, but especially given the shift from hybrid, to hybrid and cloud. Is that diagram up to date? Are you doing your homework yourself? So this is something to actually think about as a 2023 trend. Number 5 on my list, the extended network is under attack. It's not just you, it's your entire supply chain. People have understood that rather than attack Lawrence Livermore National Labs, which is really good security, maybe they can attack the HVAC contractor that is supporting Lawrence Livermore, and that might be a way to get in. It happened some years back at Target, you recall. Target got compromised simply because the HVAC vendor had an account, and that HVAC vendor wasn't secure. Target itself had been relatively secure, big business, lots of budget, focus on these kinds of things. So whereas previously cyber risk, particularly for partners, wasn't an issue, you used to think about availability, you used to think about quality, you used to think about price. Now, all of a sudden, vendors are being asked what's their cyber risk posture is. We had a customer who's a manufacturing facility. They print promotional stuff, the T-shirts, the pens, the mugs, that kind of thing. On the edge of getting a nice fat contract from AARP, had everything sorted out in terms of quality and availability and price and whatnot, all of a sudden question on cyber risk posture, whether they can pass the survey. So can you or your customers pass that if the cyber insurance people ask you? It's something to think about. Data privacy laws. GDPR, especially in the EU, has shown the way. This is comparable to seatbelt technology, back when cars became a big thing in the last century. All of a sudden, the government had to step in and mandate that you had to have seatbelts, you had to have airbags. Of course, Lee Iacocca didn't like it at all, if you remember, but it was necessary in order to protect the citizen. In similar fashion, we believe that the government is going to get involved to a certain extent. They already have. And this is going to really fall on the provider rather than on the government. Frankly, they don't have the ability or the staff or the expertise to come out and audit you. So the onus is going to be on you as a provider. By the way, this is a really good area to think about outsourcing because you can get compliance specialists, frankly, a lot cheaper than you can if you try to do it yourself. Last one on my list for trends for 2023, identity is the new endpoint. Before coronavirus, we were all about upgrading our antivirus to EDR. But now that you've gone away and all the physical controls are no longer in place, you don't have to swipe your badge. You don't have to sit at your desk in front of everybody else so that they can figure out that the person at that desk isn't the normal guy. You're sitting at home somewhere. So the only way to identify you is through your authentication mechanism. So then, do you have MFA enabled? Can you really guarantee that the person who's logging in as John is really John? So this is something to pay attention to in 2023. By the way, you can easily buy technology for a lot of this stuff, but honestly, that's only 30%. That's the tip of the iceberg that you actually see above the waterline. Where you're going to win or lose is in how disciplined you are and what kind of processes you bring to the party. And secondly, that's staff. Who are the experts that are actually watching that technology? You can get lots of technology from lots of different players, and they tend to be very solid in terms of capability, but getting value out of them is really the challenge. And so that trifecta of people, process, and technology is what you should really focus on rather than just harping on the features of this particular product or that particular product. And as you can see on the right, there are a number of, once you get past the technology pieces, your endpoint protection, your SIM, your host-based intrusion detection, it's all about what's below the waterline. Do you have detection? Do you have response? Because protection isn't perfect. At some point, stuff is going to get through. And then what? Do you have a playbook? Have you drilled it like you do for fire so that you know what is to be done when this kind of outbreak really occurs? Are you tuning appropriately? Do you have capability to recover should that happen? And of course, none of this happens without executive sponsorship. So that is something to bear in mind as well. Now, the Netsurion solution is offered across the spectrum, across the kill chain. At the bottom of the screen, you can see the kill chain. This is a Lockheed Martin construct. It starts from reconnaissance and goes all the way to action on objectives. You want protection, you have to be thinking across all of it, which means to the left of boom, which is that green breach thing over there, you got to think about predicting and preventing. Obviously, if you can do that, great. Roy Rogers, cut him off at the pass. But given the assumed breach paradigm, that is, breach is inevitable. We're not arguing here, right? It's not a question of if it will occur, it's only a question of when it will occur, what will be the attack vector, and how are we going to defend against it. Why, in that case, you must detect. And then, as Homeland Security says again and again, if you see something, don't just say something, do something. So can you actually respond and respond in a timely manner? The solution that Netsurion offers covers a lot of these areas. For prediction, for instance, we offer vulnerability management. This allows you to see, where the holes are. Because if you don't do it, the bad guys are. Did you notice yesterday, if you're using FortiVPN, that there was a critical vulnerability announced by FortiGate? And that needs attention promptly. You need to patch and come up to the latest revs. There are some IP addresses that are out and about that you need to block. But given that you might not be able to do that effectively, you need to be able to detect. But vulnerability management with threat intelligence, which we just mentioned about FortiVPN, is one area where the Netsurion solution provides support. Of course, prevention, you guys are thinking about Sentinel-1 perhaps, and endpoint protection, and then application control, which is available from within the Netsurion solution. Yes, the endpoint solution allowed it to run, but does it mean it should have run? What if it starts to do wonky things after it's been allowed to run? That's the sort of thing, the second factor, the suspenders, if you like, to the belt that keeps your pants up, because you don't want your pants coming down. Threat hunting with as few false positives as possible. Now, the primary place where a SIEM solution shines is in detection. And by the way, my marketing team will struggle if we described ourselves as a SIEM. We really think of ourselves as an XDR solution. And if you're interested into knowing what's the difference between an XDR and a SIEM, our website's got a wealth of detail. In brief, a SIEM is really collecting logs from various sources and providing information to an analyst. And XDR is not only doing that from many different sources, but it also has automatic response capability. So the two are really a little different from each other. So detection is the big deal, right? That's where the managed SIEM component comes in. XDR also includes endpoint protection. It includes vulnerability. It includes intrusion detection. It includes behavior analytics. See that guy who's logging in on workstation 15 never ever did that before? What's that about? I mean, you see this if you subscribe to Netflix, as a for instance, or to Google, where they will warn you that they suddenly have a login from a place that they hadn't seen before. Is that really you? In similar fashion, you can have this kind of behavior analysis. It's called User Entity and Behavior Analytics, UEBA. And that's a feature of the system. And of course, if you see something, you must say something. It's not enough just to sound the alarm. And so automation in terms of response, providing detail, the 5 W's. If something happened, don't tap me on the shoulder and say bad things are happening, because I don't know what I'm supposed to do there. Can't ignore it, can't do anything about it. Be specific. Tell me who, what, where, when, and specifically what do you want me to do, preferably in IT terms. Don't geek out on me security-wise and say MITRE tactic 1149 has occurred, because that might not mean anything to me as an IT practitioner. If you said user Susan is plugged in a USB on workstation 3, malware has jumped on the endpoint, it's communicating to China, you need to unplug that workstation and quarantine it and then re-image it, yeah, that is something that I can do with IT. But the rest of that stuff is nice for security folk, not meaningful for IT folk. So to be able to do that is important, of course, responding to the incident and perform forensic investigation. All of this is part of the Netsurion offering, and it applies to workstations, it applies to servers, it applies to network devices, it applies to your SaaS solutions, things like maybe Microsoft 365 or cloud, Salesforce, or the Google workspace. It applies to endpoints, Mac OS, Linux, Windows, of course, those kinds of things. And so you can get proper protection across all of your assets, including in the cloud, at the home, in the office, in the data center, in the public cloud, as your SaaS applications, and of course your people using this solution. I'm happy to take questions at this stage. I've been running on for maybe 15 minutes. So if you've got questions, happy to take them. Jarret, are we on?
Yes, hey, we're back on. Give us 1 second to get on that.
All right, so questions to the floor, like last time. You guys have questions out there? This is the time, pop them in. Or, you can also jump in and speak up. So what do you guys got? Anybody? Okay, so we've got a question from Luis. Is the threat landscape growing this past year?
It's doing two things. Number one, it's growing in terms of just simply volume and variety and velocity, number one. But number two, it's also adapting and shifting. The bad guys have understood clearly what are some of the defenses that are in place and are effective. What are the changes in the network map? So for instance, people understand now that nobody's going to click on Goober email that says there's a prince in Nigeria that wants to send you $50,000, send me this kind of money. Nobody falls for that kind of stuff. So these social engineering scams have become a lot more sophisticated. Your Amazon.com delivery is delayed and stuff of that sort, such that they're trying to get past. I mean, in COVID times, they used to promise a cure. In election times, they would tell you what the results of the elections are. And so the nature of social engineering has changed in a meaningful kind of way. I'll give you for instance. The other day, there was an attack on Uber. Now, Uber had implemented multi-factor authentication. What the guy did was he bombed a Uber employee with some 100 MFA notifications at 3 a.m. So the guy's phone is going bing, 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 bing. Now, he hasn't asked to log in, but he's so fed up. He just wants to make that stupid phone stop beeping so he can go back to sleep, that he pushes the OK button just once. And when he did that, guess what? The bad guys got access, even though Uber had MFA enabled. This kind of social engineering is new in 2023. And it's adapted because, the old stuff isn't working. The new stuff is in place. So it's changing shape, becoming more sophisticated, and it's becoming broader and wider simply because the bad guys figured out that it works. Unfortunately, their message is crime does pay.
Ananth, that brings me to an interesting question. You mentioned the operational tech earlier in your presentation, and it also made me consider and think about the Internet of Things, and all the different devices that, we encounter, like phones, like security cameras. How are you seeing that growing at this time, and how, having things kind of hit in your network, how is the XDR solution helping track, capture?
A couple of ways. One, there are certain vertical industries, power generation is a good example, healthcare is a good example, where OT is a big deal. It's not just cameras, it's not just key fob systems, but their business or manufacturing, it runs on this kind of stuff. Now, these guys tend to have at least some degree of logging, at least it's possible within the equipment. It's not a water meter. It's not, a little itty bitty camera on top of your PC. So they have some ability to log. So those things can get protected. The trick to watch out for is, are they on the same network as IT? If they are, then a vulnerability in OT can expose your IT network. Something that you got to think about. But to the extent that they're not, then you have to catch them at their controller. That is, do they phone home? Are they controlled from some one particular place? The water folks do that. Even though the meter itself isn't logging, the head office is, and they have a path, and that's the only path to the water meter. So you protect them or you watch over them in that direction.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point, and I think one of the things that we encounter often is the idea of plug and play, right? And you kind of mentioned that. A lot of these devices that we see today seem simple, plug them in and they work. The question is, and I think the answer you just said is that we have to make sure that we're isolating traffic in the networks, putting things in their own VLANs, if you will, so that they're air gapped or just as much separate separated from the active network as we can. Is that kind of tied to what you were just saying as well?
Yes, I mean, it's 2023, but the lessons of 1995 are calling.
Yeah,
Network segmentation, security hygiene,
right.
don't give out admin credentials like it's Halloween candy. This
Right.
good stuff never goes out of style.
Right, very good. I appreciate that. The nice reference to 1995, but it's the as I personally escape. I find is everything seems easier, but the reality is we still have to apply the security to make sure and add the complexity at times. We have another question from the crowd. It says that it seemed to me that Netsurion was presented as a superior solution, Sentinel-1. How do the two solutions fit together? It's a great question. How does that EDR fit with the XDR solution?
Sure. So it would be nice if your network began and ended with endpoints. If you didn't have firewalls, if you didn't have SaaS solutions, if you didn't have people, if you didn't have workstations, if you didn't have AWS or Azure in the mix, if you didn't have routers, bridges, switches, all of the things that it takes to actually make a network go. And the fact is that EDR is the predecessor of XDR. XDR is built on a SIM kernel, on an EDR kernel. Certainly, the endpoint's very important. Certainly, the endpoint is the subject of a lot of attacks. But it's only one in a plethora of data sources for XDR. Maybe the most important one even. And so we have good integration with Sentinel-1 and with many others. So if you're still using Webroot or you're still using McAfee, no problem. XDR, the whole point of the X is to extend, to be extensible. Right. And that's not just in detection, but also in response. Because remember, if you see something, don't just say something, do something. Right. I mean, we hear it and we're inured to it. But the fact is, it's good advice.
Yeah, I want to kind of carry on to that conversation a little bit. One of the things that we've looked at, two solutions together give us kind of a whole picture of the event. And many times when we've dealt with even the insurance companies on the other side of the equation, when an event occurs, they ask, where did the threat come from? Where did the threat go? What did they take? Where did it leave? And so EDR, like a Sentinel-1 does a great job of giving us a picture of what happened at the workstation. But when it comes to things like passing to the router or talking to the server, and when data is taken, moved, or dragged, that's where we see using the logging capabilities, kind of simulated, but also the extended, data detection response like you just shared, gives us a whole picture. And when we don't have that component, we're not able to answer the questions about, where did it go? What did they access as often as we can? So I think they complement each other very well.
I'll give you for instance, you heard about the SolarWinds debacle.
Right.
The way that was uncovered was an analyst sitting in front of the XDR console looked at a security zero event. That is somebody registering a mobile phone as a second factor authentication, and just took it upon himself to say, how long has that employee been with us? He's been here a couple of years. Well, we've had MFA from the day he joined. So then what's he registering a new phone for? Maybe he got a new phone and he took it upon himself to call that individual and say, I see you're registering a second factor. What up? Did you get a new phone? What'd you get? And the guy was like, what? I didn't register anything. Now, they had EDR. They had their endpoint secured. The user wasn't doing any goober thing, clicking on stupid link or inserting bad USB. He wasn't doing anything. Now, if it hadn't been for XDR catching that event and somebody in the security operations center saying, you know what, let me just check on this anyway, SolarWinds would have not come to light. And that was a super well-defended network. We're talking about Mandiant here.
Right.
Right? Who is the last word when it comes to defense? And they then pulled on that thread and uncovered that SolarWinds had been laying there for close on 8 months and no one knew. So those guys were super stealthy to get by. So then it's not that this is going to happen. Everyone seems to think that they are, the Bellagio, and then you've got Clooney and Damon out to get you. It isn't that, but it is that in some cases, certainly was that in that particular case. But that's where an XDR solution can give you coverage, which an EDR cannot.
Outstanding. Well, I certainly appreciate the time. It's a great presentation. You'll have a great tool. Any other questions from our crowd before we say thanks and close this one out? Okay. Sounds like we've got it. Ananth, I want to thank you again. Same as well with Rick. I appreciate y'all's presentations. Outstanding information. Thank you for joining us today.
A pleasure.
Okay. So I'm going to pick up and cover a few things for you guys as well. Just to kind of bring this to closure, and then before we get to the, some of the giveaways. So I wanted to kind of summarize this because we often get questioned about the value and need for cyber insurance. So I want to talk about that just a little bit. Give me a second. I'm going to share my screen. Oh, sorry, I just closed that. Let me get that back. Okay, so commonly we get a lot of questions. In fact, while we've been on this webinar, one of our clients has asked us to fill out a cyber insurance questionnaire. And oftentimes I get asked, do I even need it? And I think this is worthy of discussion. So what is cyber insurance? That's kind of like the first question, and what, any of your, providers would tell you, the goal of any cyber insurance policy is to give you some financial relief when, your business is impacted by attacks on your technology. And so kind of with that state, there's a lot to be said in that definition. One of the things that we find is that the cyber insurance provider will try to define what your technology infrastructure is and its resilience. Oftentimes they define it as just your physical environment, your network, your computers, your servers, your firewalls, and they don't include your cloud space like Office 365 platforms or third-party tools like you might get for an application. You have to be very careful to make sure that they're including all of it, because that is something that I see a lot of times in your policies, that they don't cover all of your infrastructure. So that's something to pay attention to. But one of the things they're trying to do is, again, define the infrastructure. And what we have to be careful of is recognize that insurance is not an excuse to fail to put security measures in place. What they're expecting us to do is to actually have good endpoint protection, good capability to detect a threat, trace a threat, stop a threat. Many of the tools we've talked about today cover many of that. You've heard things brought up as well, like multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication. These are, in many cases, some industries require it. Like if you're in a HIPAA environment, and we're starting to see that stretch out even into some things like Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, you're starting to see the requirement to have things like multi-factor applied, and not just to your email, but to your entire platform. Tools like Duo become, important because you can apply those to any application and not just mail. You see tools like this, and I will tell you, endpoint protection and having a live SOC is one of the things that we're seeing the biggest question come from cyber, along with the capability to have some form of SIM logging. So these are now being pushed out as requirements, and I'm going to put my quote fingers in the air on that, because what the cyber insurance company will do is in a questionnaire is ask you whether you have them in place, and they don't necessarily deny your coverage because you don't, but I can almost assure you that if you have an attack and you don't have these things in place, they won't provide any financial relief, and that's common. And so be careful when you look at your policies and ask these questions directly. If I don't have these tools, what does that mean? And what does it mean to me? So again, just pay attention to that. They expect for you to have the basics in place. They expect for you to have a firewall. That's obvious. We've been doing that for years, but that firewall has to be configured in a manner to block known threats. We have to have an ability to filter through content and make sure that we have taken away for example, some of the Eastern Bloc countries and just said flat out, nothing comes through from there. Likewise, certain kind of content has to be blocked to ensure that it can't be accessed by inside the network because it's a known threat. I mean, I can name many things, but we hear about the dark web and and Tor engines and things like that. These just can't use inside networks. Patching must happen, period. Windows patches, kind of, not always, it's not automatic. So you have to have a good strategic patching program that makes sure all security updates are placed. These are basic things that we do now. Things like antivirus, password controls, but they definitely expect you to start applying multi-factor authentication, having some means to log exceptions, anomalies, and having an advanced threat protection like a live SOC, some form of detection and response to ensure that you are stopping threats when they happen. And I heard a couple of your speakers say it today. They've said use the word when it happens. It's not if anymore. We hear about attacks every single day. And the way to prevent them is to put layers of security to block the threat. That's the key. And at the worst case scenario, be able to respond, detect it, and respond to it. So these are the basics. Here at Night, obviously, we have talked to many of you about ways we can help. There's more than what we just talked about. We also have capability to do penetration testing, vulnerability assessments. Obviously EDR and XDR, like Sentinel-1 Event Tracker. Another key element is cybersecurity awareness training. You have to educate your end users on what they're to expect. The threat landscape is changing every day. We have to be aware of what those changes are. Because what we talked about today may change tomorrow. I can say that I looked at a system yesterday and it's just out of the blue came to me because somebody was saying, well, I'm not getting any email from this one client. I don't get it. One user's not getting any email. And it's a problem because they've got a timeline on me to respond. We found that their email was being redirected into an internal hidden mailbox, and it was being read, redirected, and responded to by a threat actor who had accessed the mail. No idea what was going on. There was no obvious visibility to it. We made the recommendations to make sure that they turn on security features. I'm hoping they listen. That's all I can expect, right? So that's also all critical. So I could go on, but I want to open the floor to any questions you have related to my comments just now, or anything that that's kind of comes to mind that we haven't covered today. So do you guys have any other questions that we can address before we kind of wrap this up and do a quick little drawing? And open up the whole floor for talk, if you don't mind. I like to talk live. So anybody had a question for me? Alan, can you speak? Oh, we don't have that on. Okay, so Alan, it said that you mentioned, JB mentioned KOS give clients cybersecurity training. What does that look like? What kind of information is provided? Let me take that one, okay? So we have engaged with a cybersecurity training advisor through WebRoot. We have the ability to launch a phishing attack simulated to see how your users will respond to that. We do that blind. We can do all kinds of different attacks, whether it looks like it comes from inside, outside, third party, pretty sophisticated, and I've had many clients tell me, oh, go ahead and launch it. We're not going to click it. And I'm on average getting 20% of the staff hitting against phish. They just click it. It looks too good. We all see it every day. So that's part of cybersecurity training. The other piece of the cybersecurity training is following a phishing attack, we can have it launch a training content. These are very sophisticated, very well done, animated type lessons. They go anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes in length. Some of them even have testing elements to them where you can have Q&A and have a graded response. At the end of the day, you get every single person will get an acknowledgement of training, and you can have a system log of all the people that took it, their success, and their success factors, and you can put that into their employee files. The training can be launched at any time. There's probably about 350 different content titles, not just cyber training. It could even cover some basic business training, like how to use Excel. So we have a lot of topics that come with the package. We can launch those at intervals that you choose. There are only some small, obviously, fees to help get it going and get it launched and track it down. All covered in, all part of, arranged within your service plans. But great tool, available to all of our clients. Great question. Anybody else? If you have any questions or want to talk further about these solutions and how they can help you and your organizations, please reach out to Jarret or myself. We're definitely here to answer questions and help you, streamline your plan and get you a little bit more security applied.
Agreed. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, thank you everybody for attending. We're going to be talking to some of y'all direct. Yeah, there's some clients were on here and a few folks that aren't current clients, but we'll be lining up to send some additional information regarding pricing on some of these products as well. Thank you very much, and everybody have a great day.